have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have five guys going, five different directions.
Why did the Temptations end? What caused the group to break apart after so much success? Were their personal struggles and differences the reason behind the heartbreaking end?
Okay, my question is to Otis. Why was David Ruffin fired from the Temptations?
Could they have stayed together longer if things had been different? It's sad to think about how such an amazing group of singers who brought so much joy could not last forever. What happened to them and why did they fall apart?
The Temptations could have come from central casting. You had five great-looking, 6-foot or more singers.
The Temptations are one of the most famous groups in R&B and soul music. They were formed in the early 1960s, coming together from two earlier groups, The Distance and the Primes. Known for their smooth voices and energetic dance moves, they became a musical powerhouse.
They dressed better than anybody else, they danced better than anybody else, they sung better than anybody else, so there you have it, the Temptations.
The story of the Temptations starts with two friends, Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams. They began singing in their local church, where they discovered their love for music. As teenagers, Eddie and Paul wanted to form a singing group. They teamed up with two other friends and called themselves the Cavaliers. They later met a man named Milton Jenkins, who saw their talent. He became their manager and helped them change their name to the Primes. At the same time, Otis Williams was starting his own group, called Otis Williams and the Siberians. By 1960, the Primes broke up. Eddie reached out to Otis, who was looking for more singers for his group. Otis was trying to form a group to audition for Motown, a famous music label run by Berry Gordy. Otis invited Eddie to join, but Eddie had one request. He wanted Paul to be part of the group too. Otis agreed, and Eddie and Paul moved back to Detroit to join Otis's new group, which would eventually become the Temptations.
Long before I knew.
The Temptations started with 5 members: Otis Williams, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, Melvin Franklin, and Al Bryant. They first called themselves the Elgins and worked hard to get ready for an audition with Motown. When Berry Gordy, the head of Motown, heard them, he liked their sound and decided to sign them. They tried different names, even recording as the Pirates for a short time, but eventually they became known as the Temptations. At first, Eddie and Paul shared the lead vocals, and other members also sang lead on some songs. They were lucky to get help from Smokey Robinson, a talented singer, writer, and producer. Smokey wrote a song for them called I Want a Love I Can See, which Paul sang. While the song didn't become a big hit, fans loved hearing Paul perform it live. The Temptations struggled at first to have a big hit, and some people jokingly called them the hitless Temptations. During this time, a young singer named David Ruffin became interested in joining the group. He followed them to performances and hoped for a chance to sing with them. One night, David finally got the chance to sing on the stage with the Temptations. His voice and energy impressed everyone, and he seemed like the perfect fit for the group.
And when you are a group, you have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have five guys going, five different directions.
During their earlier days as a group, Paul Williams was the only member of the Temptations who abstained from alcohol consumption. He would, in fact, lecture his bandmates about ruining their health whenever he'd catch them covertly drinking. That's why it's tragically ironic that Williams descended into alcoholism as the Temps began to enjoy massive success as one of Motown's most popular acts. According to Otis Williams in Temptations, Paul's drinking problem might have started when he entered an affair with a woman named Winnie Brown, who worked as the Supremes' hairstylist. Paul had married young and had 5 children, Otis wrote. He was devoted to his family, but torn between them and Winnie. Before too long, Paul, who never took anything stronger than milk, started drinking. It was difficult watching his bandmate develop a drinking problem almost out of nowhere. To see a guy come from drinking milk to drinking, sometimes 2 to 3/5 of Courvoisier a day, that was kind of hard to take, he said.
I truly miss Paul. Paul was one of a kind. I could always depend on him. He was solid as a rock. And he stood by me when we were going through some turbulent times, personnel-wise.
Williams and Brown opened the Celebrity House West, a celebrity fashion boutique in downtown Detroit. The business was not as successful as planned, and Williams soon found himself owing more than $80,000 in taxes. His health had deteriorated to the point that he would sometimes be unable to perform, suffering from combinations of exhaustion and pain, which he combated with heavy drinking. Each of the other four temptations did what they could to help Williams, alternating between raiding and draining his alcohol stashes, personal interventions, and keeping oxygen tanks backstage. Ultimately, Williams' health, as well as the quality of his performances, continued to decline, and he refused to see a doctor.
Long before I knew.
Williams was found dead inside a car parked in an alley, having just left the new house of his then-girlfriend after an argument. A gun was found near his body. His death was ruled an apparent suicide. According to Otis Williams, Paul had expressed suicidal thoughts to him and Melvin Franklin months before his death. Not everyone believed that Paul Williams' death was a suicide, however. Unexplained circumstances surrounding his death caused his family to suspect some kind of foul play, though nothing was ever remotely proven. The three issues are laid out. First, Williams was shot on the left side of his head, but his gun was found in his right hand. In order to have shot himself, Williams would have had to angle his gun in an impractical manner. Second, a bottle found by his left had shattered, as if he had dropped it. Third, the gun had been fired twice, but only one bullet was lodged inside Williams. So the official story remains official, albeit with questions unanswered. Eddie Kendricks is best known for his amazing falsetto voice, which he used to make songs like "The Way You Do the Things You Do," "Get Ready," and "You're My Everything" sound unforgettable. His voice was a key part of the Temptations' success. He wasn't just a lead singer, he also helped create most of the group's vocal arrangements. Eddie even served as the wardrobe manager for the group, choosing their outfits, including the famous purple suits they wore during one performance. Although Norman Whitfield was the main songwriter for the Temptations, Eddie did not just sing, he also co-wrote some of the group's songs and received credit for his work. His contributions to the band went beyond singing. He played a big role in shaping the group's sound and style.
Well, I think Eddie was probably the first guy to give falsetto some real quality.
In an interview with a Chicago TV show called Urban Street, Eddie revealed that he had thought about leaving the Temptations back in 1965. This was just when the group was starting to get really famous, but he said there were problems behind the scenes that made him unhappy. He felt that the people they were working with didn't always have the band's best interests in mind. Despite these feelings, Eddie chose to stay because he worried that leaving would mean he wouldn't get the support he needed. He also shared that his relationship with the group's leader, Berry Gordy, wasn't great. Eddie said, "I know he didn't particularly care for me, and he didn't agree with many decisions made by the group's management." Sadly, by 1982, during the ill-fated Temptations reunion tour, Eddie was no longer the same. Years of heavy smoking had taken a toll on his voice, and he could no longer hit the high notes he once could. Still, he kept performing, often with other former members of the Temptations, like David Ruffin and Dennis Edwards. Eddie continued to perform live for several years, but his health problems started to get worse. By the 1990s, Eddie's health had really declined. He had one of his lungs removed due to smoking-related problems. Eddie, who had smoked for over 30 years, used his experience to warn young people not to make the same mistake. Sadly, on October 5, 1992, at just 52 years old, Eddie Kendricks passed away from lung cancer in a hospital in his hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. Looking back on his legacy, Esther Edwards, the Temptations' first manager, spoke about Eddie's unique voice. She said, "Eddie just had that great tenor voice that was so captivating. He had such admirers, men and women. But the ladies really loved Eddie and his style. He just had a sweet, melodious, captivating, tender sound." Eddie Kendricks' voice and style left a lasting mark on the music world, and he will always be remembered for his amazing talent. Al Bryant, one of the original members of the Temptations, began to get frustrated as the group's success grew. He didn't like how slow things were moving and started missing practices. He even began having fights with the other members. According to Otis Williams, Al also started drinking more, which made his attitude worse. Things got worse when Al attacked Paul Williams with a beer bottle during an argument. Despite this, Paul convinced the others not to kick Al out of the group. But Al's behavior got even worse. At a Christmas party in 1963, he caused trouble again, and this time, the group decided it was too much. They fired him. Years later, after a show in Detroit, the Temptations ran into Al. He looked very different. His hair was messy, and he had dark circles under his eyes. Otis noticed he seemed very sad. Sadly, Al Bryant passed away on October 26, 1975, at just 36 years old, from cirrhosis of the liver. His story was a sad reminder of how a promising career can be ruined by personal struggles.
Me and Marvin used to pack records for Anna Records. My first record was on Vega Records with Tommy Smalls, used to be a disc jockey in New York, and Willie Stork, and on the Stork Club in New York. And I was 16 then. That's when I used to have to walk Melvin Franklin home.
After the Temptations let Bryant go, they needed someone new. That's when they brought in David Ruffin to replace him. With David in the group, the Temptations finally found what they had been missing. They were now ready to become one of the biggest names in Motown. Smokey Robinson saw that David Ruffin had a special voice. His voice was mellow but strong, which made him stand out. Smokey thought David could sing a hit song, so he worked with his friend Ronnie White to write My Girl. They let David sing lead, and the song became a huge success, reaching #1 on the pop charts. It was the Temptations' first big hit and still one of their most famous songs today. David Ruffin's childhood was tough. He lost his mother when he was very young and grew up in a poor family. His father, Eli Ruffin, was said to be abusive and made David and his siblings sing in church. David's older brothers had to deal with physical abuse from their father. Later, the group's music took a different turn. Norman Whitfield, the new producer, added a more upbeat, funky sound. His song, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, became a huge hit, and Whitfield became the Temptations' main producer. With David's voice and the new sound, the Temptations' success continued to grow. David Ruffin was a key member of the Temptations, but as the group became more successful, problems started to arise. One of the biggest issues was his growing drug addiction. Ruffin started using cocaine in the 1960s, but by the end of the decade, his drug habit became a serious problem. His friend Linster Butch Merle remembered how bad things got, saying, "He was getting so high. The man was a walking skeleton." Ruffin's drug use caused him to miss rehearsals and performances, which worried the other members of the Temptations. As Ruffin's success grew, he began to expect special treatment. He started riding in a private limo with his girlfriend, Motown singer Tammy Terrell, while the other members of the group had to share a different limo. This behavior started to annoy the other Temptations. Ruffin also wanted the group to be renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations, just like how other Motown groups, like Diana Ross and the Supremes, had their names changed. The other Temptations didn't agree with this request and grew frustrated with him.
Well, you see, when we first started out, we made a vow that we would not change, because we had heard about Frankie Lyman leaving the Teenagers and Tony Williams leaving the Platters, so we made a vow.
Things started to get even worse when Ruffin had issues with Motown's boss, Berry Gordy. Ruffin wanted to know exactly how much money the group was making. Motown agreed to let an outside accounting firm look at the group's finances, but the firm didn't have full access to the financial records. By this time, Ruffin's drug use was causing him to miss meetings, rehearsals, and concerts, which only made the tension worse. The breaking point came when Ruffin missed an important performance in Cleveland because he wanted to go see a show with his new girlfriend, Barbara Gail Martin. The rest of the group had enough and decided to fire him. They made it official by drawing up legal papers, and the next day, Dennis Edwards was brought in to replace Ruffin as the lead singer of the Temptations.
And when you are a group, you have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have 5 guys going, 5 different directions.
Ruffin's troubles with drugs and his behavior caused a lot of problems for the group, and eventually they made the tough decision to move on without him. David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks were good friends before their time with the Temptations. When Ruffin was first dismissed from the group, he seemed to accept it. He even encouraged his old friend Edwards to do well with the group. But things changed when Edwards performed his first show as the lead singer of the Temptations. Ruffin showed up at the concert, grabbed the microphone, and sang his old song, "Ain't Too Proud to Beg." He did this several times during the tour, jumping on stage and taking over the lead role on songs he once sang. Despite the group hiring extra security to stop him, Ruffin always found a way to sneak in and steal the spotlight. After leaving Motown, Ruffin moved on to Warner Brothers Records. He released 2 albums, So Soon We Change and Gentleman Ruffin. Later, he teamed up with his old friend Eddie Kendricks, and the two worked together on some music. But sadly, Ruffin's life ended too soon. On June 1st, 1991, he passed away from a drug overdose. He collapsed at a crack house in West Philadelphia, where he had been with his friend Donald Brown.
Alcohol and all types of drugs were just a part of the David Ruffin.
In the book Temptations, Otis Williams shared his memory of seeing Ruffin for the last time. It was just a few months before Ruffin died. Otis remembered that Ruffin didn't look like the same person he once knew. The drugs had taken a toll on his health, and he looked very weak. Otis knew right then that Ruffin's time was running out. It was a sad end for a man with so much talent. Otis Williams, one of the founding members of the Temptations, has played an important role in the group for years. Even though he didn't sing many of the lead parts on their famous songs, he's known as the glue that kept the group together. In a 2018 interview with Rolling Stone, he described himself as the band's leader, helping guide them through many challenges. One of the toughest moments in Otis's life was the tragic death of his son, Lamont. Lamont, a 24-year-old construction worker, died in a workplace accident in 1985. This loss was very hard for Otis, but he found comfort in performing. In a 2023 interview with The Express, Otis explained that when he got on stage with the Temptations, it helped him forget his pain for a while. He said, "I was grieving because I lost my son, but when I got up on stage, I realized I was bringing people happiness." He always tried to turn his sorrow into something positive by making others happy with his music. Despite his personal struggles, Otis has always pushed through and kept the music going.
Melvin Franklin. I was impressed with Melvin when I heard him sing with a group called Voice Masters, and at the time he was 16 years old. And to hear a 16-year-old young boy with a bass sounding like an old man, I had to meet him.
Melvin Franklin was a key member of the famous music group, The Temptations. He was the bass singer who helped the group make some of the most memorable songs in music history. Sadly, after the deaths of 2 other original members, David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks, Melvin also passed away in the 90s. On the day of his tragic death, Melvin was in West Hollywood. He had stopped to talk to a friend outside a hair salon, and while he was talking, he left his car running. That's when a carjacker saw his chance and tried to steal the car. Melvin tried to stop him, but the thief pulled him out of the car and drove away. During this struggle, Melvin was shot in the hand and leg. The carjacker didn't seem to recognize Melvin as part of the Temptations, but once he realized who he was, he still kept going with the robbery. Melvin had been facing health challenges for some time. He had rheumatoid arthritis, a condition that causes pain in the joints. To help with the pain, he was given cortisone shots, but these also weakened his immune system. This led to other health problems, like diabetes and a severe skin infection called necrotizing fasciitis. Melvin had to travel with oxygen tanks just to help him breathe during his tours. Despite all these health issues, he kept performing with the Temptations. Melvin Franklin passed away on February 23, 1995, at the age of 52. His death was caused by heart failure, but his health problems, especially the diabetes, made things worse. His death left Otis Williams as the last remaining original member of the group. In his book, Otis Williams shared a heartfelt memory of his friendship with Melvin. They had been close for over 30 years, and Otis wrote that Melvin was like a brother to him. He said that after the deaths of Eddie and David, it was just him and Melvin, and they were able to understand each other in a way no one else could. They had shared so much together, and Otis missed him deeply.
Meantime, Chicago police are investigating the death of Temptations lead singer Dennis Edwards. There are allegations involving his wife.
Dennis Edwards was a key member of the Temptations, replacing David Ruffin as the lead singer. However, after Edwards joined, things started to go downhill. He began partying hard and using drugs like cocaine. He would often show up late or even drunk to rehearsals and shows. This behavior led to him missing some performances, and eventually he was replaced by another singer. Despite these issues, Edwards later went on to have a solo career and even reunited with Ruffin and another former Temptation, Eddie Kendricks. Together, they toured and called themselves the former leads of the Temptations. After that, Edwards started his own group called Dennis Edwards and the New Temptations. But this led to a legal battle with Otis Williams, a member of the original Temptations. Williams didn't like Edwards using the Temptations name. In 1997, a judge said Edwards could continue using New, as it was something new and catchy, but Williams didn't give up and appealed. Eventually, a court ruled that Edwards couldn't use the name Temptations. So Edwards changed his group's name to The Temptations Review, featuring Dennis Edwards. Edwards' death in February 2018 was a sad moment for his fans. He passed away 2 days before his 75th birthday. The cause of death was complications from meningitis. But what made his passing even more tragic were the claims made before he died. There was an emergency order filed that accused his wife, Brenda, of neglect and abuse. It was said that Brenda took away Edwards' hearing aids, phone, and iPad, and even tried to suffocate him. His daughter, Issa Pointer Stewart, said she didn't hear anything about meningitis from his doctors either. Brenda Edwards denied all these accusations. She said that she loved her husband and would never harm him. Later in 2018, it was found that the accusations were false, and her name was cleared. Dennis Edwards' legacy lives on through his music, especially his time with the Temptations during their psychedelic soul era. Despite the drama and struggles, his voice remains one of the most memorable in the history of Motown music.